On a simple level, we can work with surveys, and I always recommend that teachers do surveys on the first day. And a survey gets at some important information. It gets at academic background, professional background. I like to know if where they've studied, and if they've studied, did they do GED here? Did they do some high school here? But actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because really, for me to understand where they are as English learners, I need to see them in action. And for me, I think my assessment happens the first 3, sometimes 4 weeks of the semester. So I want to know how their writing is, and I want to know how they can speak. Can they work in groups? Do they work well in groups? How are they with pair work? Can they do their homework? Do they understand their homework? Do they understand Brightspace, our course management system? So all of these aspects work for me, help me understand where they are as English learners. I may start out with a syllabus and a curriculum, as all teachers do, except anyone who's been in the classroom for many years knows that sometimes you don't throw that syllabus away, but you have to adapt it and adjust it to the needs of your students. And so maybe I get a group of students, like during the pandemic, for example, the students were coming to my class, but they weren't at the level that I thought they might be. So I really had to adjust my assignments. Now, I don't want to make the level lower, because they do have to accomplish certain goals. But it can inform how I structure my assignments, how I structure the homework. Do I ask them to do more group work, less group work, more pair work, individual, more speaking assignments, more writing assignments? So I think in the first couple of weeks of any semester, it's important to start with an open mind, and that you can shape your curriculum according to really what your students need.
One important thing for faculty to keep in mind when working with students whose native language is not English is to use a variety of modalities when they teach. So if they're giving a lecture, punctuate it with a visual. Stop and ask for a comprehension check. Ask students to repeat in their own words what they understand of what's going on. If they're showing a video, closed captioning is essential, I think. And also allowing students to express their understanding of the content in multiple ways, whether it be via a speech, via a collage. There are many ways in other disciplines for students to demonstrate their understanding of the content. Another thing that's very important for faculty who teach in disciplines other than English for speakers of other languages is to recognize that sometimes these students may need the help, whether it's coursework or tutoring, from someone who is credentialed in working with speakers of other languages, because there are some aspects of the English language that native speakers take for granted, especially native speakers who have not been trained in working with speakers of other languages. So it's very important for our faculty to be able to recognize if a student is struggling, to be able to recommend for that student a place where they can get some help. I often use this situation where a student once said, "I stopped to smoke a year ago." And what the student really meant was, "I stopped smoking." And so how do you explain this to a student? That meaning has completely changed. If you're trained in working with speakers of other languages, you will notice that what they've done is they have used an infinitive instead of a gerund, and it completely changed the meaning. So it's the aha moment that these students may need some assistance from someone who's trained in working with speakers of other languages.
That's an excellent question. So as Anna was talking about, we have students from all over the world, and some of the programs at the CCC have more of one population versus another population. And so, for example, at Harold, because we're closer to Chinatown, we have a large Asian, specifically Chinese population. But then, if you went to Truman, for example, and you had people from other parts of the world, the class would look very different. students would participate in different ways. And so you cannot expect one strategy for one group of students to work with with another group of students. And I spent my first many years teaching Latino population, Latinx population, and then I got to a more Asian population, and I really had to change the way I taught. And so that can look at many, that can look at it can look like many things. I really don't rely on whole group discussion very much. I do a lot more small groups, and within those small groups, I like to do assignments where each group actually has a different task or a different part of an assignment. So whether they're reading something or watching a TED talk or they're analyzing grammar in an essay or whatever they're doing, um, they have different tasks. And then within each group, I like to assign different students different roles. So one student is the note taker, one student is the reporter, another student is the timekeeper. And so whether or not they're all talking equally, they are participating because they have special jobs to do. And so that's one way that I have learned to tackle participation. Another way to engage students is with tech tools. And I think this is a term that people like to throw around. Oh, just use technology in your classroom and everything will be fine. Not so much. You have to know how to use the technology, and you have to know how to engage students with that technology. So I love to use something called Kahoot, which is a program. You just make questions and then students participate with their phones. And I also love having students use their phones. So sometimes I'm like, get rid of your phones. But actually, I don't think that we have to, as teachers, we have to say no phones ever. I think phones can be very useful for helping students participate in a class. You can use activities that have them do polls where you ask them specific questions, and then they anonymously put their answers on their phone, but then they pop up on the screen. So actually, everyone can see them, can see their answers, but they are anonymous. And so they're participating not verbally, perhaps, in that exercise, but they are participating in terms of their engagement in the classroom. So I don't teach native speakers, actually. I haven't in a very long time, but I would say that most of the assessment at certain levels will be very similar. So let's take for example, the writing process. I want to see every step of that writing process, and I'm going to assume that people who teach native speakers are doing something very similar. I want to see brainstorming, I want to see outlines, rough drafts, first drafts, second drafts. And I think for me, in terms of my students' progress as ESL students, I really need to see that process because I will stop them if they're going astray. So I think in terms of writing, there's a lot of parts that mirror what you would do teaching native speakers. I'm not a big fan of large, comprehensive exams. I prefer smaller, more frequent quizzes, and I'm not even a big quizzer. But I do think that giving them many opportunities and multiple means of assessment is the way to go, especially in language. I want to look at their speaking. I want to look at their reading and their writing. And I actually like to use presentations, but I think for presentations, you have to be very careful in how you assess them because I don't want to just assess a presentation on a group's work. So when I do presentations, I make sure I assess their individual components and there are group components. And therefore, if a group doesn't work very well, an individual is not penalized because their group wasn't able to get their act together. Another way of assessing students is having one-on-one conversations with them. And I think those can happen in office hours, face to face, or on Zoom, or actually in the class. And what I often do in my class is I put on the syllabus, you need to meet with the teacher, or me, a couple times during the semester. So then they can just tell me what they need. I can get a better understanding of how they're doing in their class, if there's anything that I need to worry about, or if there's something I can help them with. And if you have a large amount of students, as many of us do, I take one or two class sessions during the semester, usually after I've given back an essay, and I really want to talk to them, and so I can guide them in in the revision process. So I'll just take some time during class. I'm doing that right now, actually. Just gave back an assignment, And then I have students working on other things during that time, but then I can meet students whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then and then it doesn't burden my office hours, because if you have three classes and each class has 20, 25 students, it's a lot to do in office hours.